What's going on, you guys? It's your huggable hipster here, and welcome back to Aesthetically Techie, the podcast where we talk about anything and everything. So today is going to be a rather interesting topic because this is very last minute, and this is something that I wanted to actually have a discussion on while I still could, and while everybody is still in the pandemic, experiencing all the array of different things that are, from politics to religion to gaming to different practices that might be either good or bad. And I wanted to sit down and have a discussion with my friend Hody. He is a fellow game reviewer and he does a lot of the same stuff I do. He's fresh on the scene, so please be sure to give him your warmest welcome. Hi Hody, what's going on,
Hey
buddy?
everybody, you probably know me from one of my three very lukewarm reviews. Very famous among the three people who have read them. No, I appreciate you having me on. James journalism. Games journalism is a fantastic subject, and it's fun to talk with you, an industry vet, especially as I am kind of just now getting into it. Right now, I'm still mostly doing fluff pieces and whatnot like that, and the reviewing part is like a side gig for me that I'm trying to get into, but I've done a couple of them.
Do you want to tell us what place do you work for, or do you do freelance mostly?
So it is technically freelance, but you will find me very consistently at Game Rant and The Gamer, um, both Valnet companies, and they're both really great. They pay really great. They pay great per article, and it's one of those that the regular work never dries up, and they are increasing in their stock, as is most of games journalism. Games journalists, media outlets are expanding, and that is so exciting as a gamer. And yeah, I'm pretty stoked about that.
It really is. I feel like this is a very blossoming area within the games community, and I'm very fortunate to be able to see it grow as much as it is. So it's great to have you on. I've actually wanted to start this conversation with you on this podcast because I had originally posted a tweet. I think this is what started me having the idea to have you on here. Was that I am, well, and we're going to get into it later, but just to give you guys a little bit of a teaser, is that I'm an atheist. So and Hody is a Christian, if I'm getting that
Yeah,
correctly.
I'm not an
Okay.
atheist. Yeah.
And I posted a tweet saying, listen, you guys, I was born Jewish. Okay, I'm always going to be Jewish. But at the end of the day, I did choose atheism. I did choose to not believe in God. And we're going to be going into that conversation, which I think is going to be really interesting. So stay tuned for that. But first and foremost, we're going to talk about games journalism because that's what we know best right now. So my first question to you is, how do you like the field so far? Since you're so fresh in the business right now, I feel like I want to get like a beginner's look into the view of it.
Yeah. So one thing that I love about it, I love it. I love it. One thing that I really love about it is I do really thrive with setting my own schedule, writing during work hours that are when I'm the most awake, when I'm doing my best work. If I want to write 7 articles in a day, which I've done before, I can do that. If I want to write no articles in a day, recharge my batteries, I can absolutely do that. Of course, I love the subject matter. Um, the pay is great. It's pay for performance, right? They want to make sure your articles are getting so many hits, and then you get a certain amount of money if you're great at, making an article that gets a lot of hits. And I think that for me, pay by performance is what we should all be doing. I think it's funny that, or I mean, even nationally, we're having like a minimum wage discussion. And I'm like, so long as we are talking about minimums and not dealing with maximum wage, I really don't care about the subject. Like, you're talking about, I mean, right now they're saying, well, this will create, 900,000 jobs and make 1.6 million people unemployed, according to the Congressional Budget Office. And I'm like, man, that's because you're dealing with a minimum wage. Right now you're looking at people that are at the bottom rung and just saying, like, all right, what's the least we can give you right now? As opposed to, man, you are killing it at the movie theater. You're killing it at the concession stand. Or you're killing it at, I mean, I hate to be derogatory, but these are minimum wage jobs. And to say, like, man, your performance today merited better than minimum wage, merited better than what you're getting. And I think that for me, games journalism fit that so well because I have frequently been, and this is this is going to sound somewhat conceited, although I think everybody understands when you found the right line of work that you're like, man, I excel at this, but why am I making the same amount of money as this guy over here? And thankfully, games journalism, at least from my experience right now, even on the bottom rung, you get paid by performance. And I think that for me, that is so thrilling to be able to say, like, I'm really good at this. I know how to make a headline that people click on. I know how to write a subject that's interesting. I know how to interact with people and generate all that. And I am so sick of not being paid, in these other, whether it's your local newspaper. I mean, almost everything they take is a freebie donated article, and
Exactly,
if you're
yeah.
tired of that, hey, get paid, and I'm loving it. And they could hire more people and it wouldn't concern me one bit because it's burgeoning. I guess another thing that I love about it is that it is so gamers have been stigmatized for a long time, and we're still just getting out of it, and it's only very recently. So the video game industry, for those of y'all who need to Google this, it's unbelievable that it's true, but it is bigger than the music industry. It's bigger than movies. It's bigger than Hollywood.
Oh yeah.
It's a larger industry than like all those combined, and so it's funny.
Yeah, it's mind blowing,
Right,
honestly.
and it's funny. So like I've gone through some single periods, had to do some dating online. And it's funny that when you date online, it's very common to say, like, well, who's your favorite band? What are your favorite songs? These are common ones. What you won't almost ever see is what's your favorite video game? What kind of gaming do you play? And yet, it is more likely that you play video games than listen to music. I mean, people play to some degree. And we're just kind of now realizing that. It's kind of one of those, like, everybody was ashamed, and then we all look at each other and we're like, wait, everybody's doing this? I thought this was just like me.
Yeah, exactly.
And so right now it's very much expanding, and it's expanding to where it needs to be at, because you look at music journalism, or the coverage of celebrities. Let's just take that. I mean, there's already a huge media conglomerate based on that. Even if you only stick to watching local news, they will feel obligated to cover celebrities just because we consider it news. And we're just now realizing, hey, wait a minute, there are just as many people playing video games as there are people who understand, like, what's going on with Kanye West and Kim Kardashian. There's just as many people, as far as a market goes, that are interested in what's the next Horizon Zero Dawn going to look like? What's the next, what's the deal with Hitman 3? Was the medium a good game or not? And we're just now figuring it out. And so one of the things that I love is that there's a good chance that perfect article about the medium hasn't been written yet. And there's a place for you there if you think you're the person who has that perfect take, and so plus, let me give you a third one, and then I'll shut up for a minute just to fully answer this question. As far as everything I love about games journalism, I'm just going to keep coming across these, I'm sure, but just as a third and final one, there are so many video games that come out that you don't have to love every single game to find, like, your spot. With a movie, you're sometimes you'll get 3 big movies in a weekend. With video games, you get, and that's like on accident, and if the scheduling went really wrong, and freak accident. Video games, oh my goodness. You've got 15 notable ones a month that people will want to be talking about and discussing. And so I have never felt like I had to play a game that people will like, but I don't like, because I can just be like, oh, I'll just let the people that really like this kind of game cover this, and I'm going to cover the game that I like. Easy. And so I've never had to be like, oh my gosh, I'm going through a real funk in video games because I have to play this, even though I hate it. Because I think every line of work except for games journalism has that to some degree, where you're just like, I am so obligated to do, I have to, I did restaurant management for a while, right? And it's like, I got to clean the bathroom. I got to, there's upkeep with the job. Even if there's things that I like about the job, there's all that upkeep. And there's very little of that upkeep with games journalism.
Right. And that's the thing. It's interesting that you bring up the Medium. Actually, I just finished my review for the Medium, which, by the way, guys, goes out on Wednesday for everybody, just so you know. Um, and it's funny because, like, I see so many people who have this great divide of people who either really love the game or they really just dislike the game. And spoilers, I'm going to even put this in the title of the podcast where we're going to be talking about spoilers in video games as well. So you've
Sweet.
been warned. Yeah, with the Medium, okay, have you played the Medium, first of all? Because I don't want to give spoilers unless you've played
I
it.
have played it. You're fine.
Okay, all right, just good. When it got to the part of where it was talking about Lily and her experience, and I said on camera what I thought it was, and then everybody agreed. It makes me trepidatious to even post this article because there's with games like this, it has such very interesting yet taboo topics that really aren't discussed in storylines. And I feel like with games like this that kind of push the envelope and try to get people to understand that, hey, this happens in real life, putting it in a tangible way, I feel like that's what makes game journalism all worth it. Because we can cover it in a way that people can kind of digest it easier in a more cohesive form, if that makes sense.
Absolutely makes sense. Yeah, you phrase things in a way that, I mean, this is what talented wordsmiths like yourself have been doing for a while, and things that I'm kind of I've had a knack for writing, but of course, always room for improvement, always getting better, always realizing new things. But are able to phrase things in a way that make people happier that they're playing the game, that they've liked the game. I think with a game like the Medium, I think that there's a mood that you should be in when you play it. I think gamers are lucky we have this embarrassment of riches, and that there's so many different games to choose from, and so many different genres and different feelings, and you can absolutely be in the wrong mood to play a video game, even though it's a good video game, to just be like, hey, this is the mood that you should be in. And I think it's something, that I've noticed from your reviews, to be like, hey, if you're the person that likes this, or if you're feeling this kind of way, you should play this game. And that's excellent. I think something that I learned from you, it's excellent advice, because I think that that's something that reviewers can help themselves with, to just say, when we talk about something like a cheeseburger, if we were a food reviewer, well, there's a mood for a cheeseburger, right? Like what kind of vibe are you feeling when you're feeling a cheeseburger? You know what I mean? You don't just come in there thinking you're all, everything needs to be fancy all the time, and that's what makes something delicious, and so everybody's a steak eater 24/7. They'd be like, hey,
right, exactly.
Let me help you with the mood that you might be in. If you're in this kind of mood, then play this game. And we know this even with the games. I think everybody listening to this probably has at least 2 or 3 different kind of games that they'll go back to, right? To just say, hey, I'm not always in the mood for Hades. I'm probably in the mood for Hades most of the time, but there's a certain type of day that I have where I'm just like, I'm not in the mood for that kind of like brain thinking to have to make. I mean, every time I run through this game, I have to make 30 different decisions. And I'm just not. I'm not in the mood for decision making right now. I'm gonna go play MLB The Show. I'm gonna turn the setting down to easy. I'm gonna crank 5 home runs in a ball game, and then feel like I'm top of the world. And there's a mood for both of those that's very different. And I think that's something that you're touching on there.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. It's funny that you mentioned that, because it's like I was so in the mood to play Animal Crossing yesterday, and now it's just like I want to kill zombies. Like you have to be in the different mood for different types of video games. And I feel like with the Medium, this was such a revolutionary game. I feel, because people kept comparing it to Silent Hill. People kept comparing it like, oh, it's the next Silent Hill. It has Akira Yamaoka who did the music, which, by the way, the music, in my opinion at least, I felt like was absolutely incredible. What did you think?
Oh, yeah. Especially when, so I'm not big on horror games, and I really enjoyed the Medium. And I think it's funny, because that's a place where you and I differ a lot, is because I see your video game channel, and I'm just like, oh man, there's a lot of horror going on here. I haven't played any Resident Evil since like 3. And like this girl's on top of all the latest news, and I'm just like, oh man, I just could not care less about horror games. And the Medium still got me, because I felt like this was Bloober Team kind of like an outreach thing, to be like, hey, horror is more than jump scares. I think one of the notable things about the medium is the lack of jump scares, actually, as far as what one would consider a classic, scary or horror game or whatever you want to, however you want to phrase it. That it's a different, and the music contributes a lot to that. I know you asked a simple question, but I feel like I had to give you a complicated answer for it to give you the full thing.
Oh no, go for it. Honestly, this is what these
Yeah,
podcasts are for.
rambling. The music is such a huge piece of this because it gives you that perfect buildup when you're, I think a lot of times we're used to walking down the halls and you hear like pat 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 of feet as you walk down the hall, and it's just like, oh, that was a really cool echo effect, but it's the same effect, and I'm ultimately just walking down the hall, and I'm really just going from A to B. The interesting thing, and there's an interesting thing in this room and an interesting thing in this next room, and this is just in between. And the medium kind of respects the gamer's time when you're going in between rooms, and one of the way they do that is by that musical buildup that helps you kind of like feel like I'm apprehensive to go in this next room, or maybe I'm elated to go in this next room, and the music's kind of changing to assist that, and it's one of those music I think is a big underestimated part of video games. When I first got into this, man, like I guess it's been about 5 months now, but when I first got into this, one of my thoughts was, you know what, it'll be really easy to do is for me to like listen to an audiobook or a podcast while I play video games. It's going to be great. I'm going to hit my brain in two different places. And I realized so quickly that even on some of my favorite games where I knew the music by heart, I could not do it because the music was such a part of it. You think of like a big lumbering guy, man. Silent Hill's a great example, like the triangle heads, without the pyramid heads, without the. See, shows how much I know about horror games. But like, as it's lumbering by, if it is just silent, then it's just takes a long time, right? You're like this big lumbering guy, and then when the
Honestly, yeah.
music's there, you're like, oh my gosh, there's a big dude. Like this guy's tall, his head's almost touching the ceiling. I don't know where he sees out of. This is freaking me out. And the music is such a contributing factor to it. It's denial to think that music doesn't touch the soul. I mean, animals respond to music. I mean, it's so basic that music is so important. And I love that Blue Routine really, especially with the medium, was just saying, hey, let's make the music. This needs to be a focus, and it can't just be enough to have to be a good soundtrack. We want to be. I mean, you look at the games that contended for soundtrack of the year at the Game Awards, and you're just like, oh, soundtrack matters, because almost all of these contended for Game of the Year. Not just it wasn't just music. It's the music really enhanced your game.
Yeah, and that's actually how I feel about Ori and the Blind Forest and the Will of Wisps. Like, for me personally, that had some of the best orchestral composure I feel ever in video
You're,
games.
that was my so it's funny. I was thinking about the Game Awards when I was voting this last year, and was just Ori was my most listened to soundtrack, and there was a lot of great soundtracks. For me, the best part of the Game Awards was when the London Philharmonic Orchestra did that mashup of the songs from the.
Oh, I
It was
loved
like
that.
chills down my spine. I was like, this is so cool, like listening to them do, everything Doom to Hades to, and I was just like, oh my gosh, these are great. But Ori and the Blind Forest, the music there, I just found myself. I listened to an absurd amount of it, and I didn't even like realize it because it's great background. It's oohs and ahs. There's not lyrics. Which is great while I'm typing and working because I need something going on. But if I have somebody, I guess for me, every writer is different. What can I say? There's this dynamism between like the everyday like soulful run around the forest, having like a spiritual experience, to like I am running away from something that's going to eat me, and then you get that like, oh, and it's you get the full, they go from the single female soloist to like a full choir, and they add in some drums, and you're just like, oh wow, this is I can when I listen to the soundtrack, I remember running away from the owl. You know what I mean? I remember running away, and hiding behind something before it could, as it like scratches the surface. And I'm just like, oh, I remember all these things when I listen to the soundtrack. It kind of floods back, and it's the hallmark of a good soundtrack. They certainly knew what they were doing with that one. Moon Studios was in a unique position during the pandemic. They are a remote studio. They have everybody work from home, and they were in a uniquely uh, advantageous situation because they weren't meeting face to face anyway. And with Ori could show that it really did not disrupt their processes one bit last year, which is great because games were needed more than ever last year as everybody's cooped up inside.
Yeah, and I think that's so vital whenever you're doing a video game and everything, especially one to the magnitude of Ori, because it's kind of like this Metroidvania style game where you don't really see too many Metroidvania style games besides that one. And I feel like Little Nightmares has that
I
as
have
well.
not played Little Nightmares, but I'm probably missing out. Unfortunately, so many things get released. I have, like I talked about, embarrassment of riches. We are spoiling for it, and I have my choice of my favorite games to play every month. I'm sure it's sad because I'm sure I'm missing a few of them. I only recently got into the Hitman series with Hitman 3, and I was like, where was I this whole time? And of course, I mentioned this on Twitter, and everybody's like, where were you this whole time? Where were you? That's what we want to know. And I was like, I don't know. I guess I must have been under a rock, or just I had too many other things to play. I'm sorry. It's just, but yeah, Little Nightmares. I will keep that in mind. The Metroidvania style. It's funny how people ache for it. I think, I mean, for me, it touches a lot of like Mario Brothers 3, scratches a lot of that itch that you have. Like if you're a fan of like Mario 3, where you're just like, oh, this world was so bright and vibrant, and uh, there's so many ways to do things. I think Ori certainly made me feel like a kid again, and that I was appreciating something for the first, for that I hadn't appreciated for a long time. It's like if your mom gave you corn dog and you're like, well, I'm an adult, I haven't eaten a corn dog in forever. I'm sure I'll hate it, or I'm sure it's not as good as I remember. And then you play Ori and you're just like, no, corn dogs are fantastic. Give me this. I needed this. It needed to never go away.
Honestly, I feel that. I've actually never had a corn dog before, but my mom's matzo ball soup always brings that memory back. It's like, I don't have time to sit down and have a bowl of soup right now. It's like, no, I do. Cheryl, don't listen.
Everybody's got that food that reminds them. It's funny that you mentioned matzo ball soup because that's actually one that I have a memory of. My grandma making it. We were talking about things that were made by somebody that you love, and so if somebody were to make it poorly but make the same mistakes that a relative made, that would do it. And I know for me, my grandma, she's no longer with us, but her matzo ball soup will live forever, and so I still kind of appreciate an undercooked dough ball in the middle of soup. And if that makes me classless, I don't care. It just hits my brain the right way that makes me feel like a kid. And I mean, touch on movies for a sec. For those who've seen Ratatouille, that's the way they get to the critic at the end, is with the Ratatouille, is to be like, this is such a, it's supposed to be this
Yes.
lowbrow, Cockney, who would ever eat this? And the critic's like, oh, I would. I loved this, and it's okay to love something that you might think is lowbrow. I think it's a perfect. I think it's perfect segue for a lot of people into video games to say like, oh, aren't video games lowbrow? Isn't that what all the slackers were doing in high school? And then you realize all those slackers that turned out to be millionaires might have been onto something. And even if you don't make it your career, and I know we're talking about games journalism, so we're kind of focusing on the career part, but even if you just have it as a side part of your life, man, it's such a valid side thing in your life. Such a valid form of entertainment. It touches on music, on visuals, on physics, on information. I mean, it just touches on anything that you want, and it's interactive.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that's so vibrant about this community is like we were all those kids in high school who were too afraid to say, yeah, I'm into this thing. Especially like as a female, I would tell people in high school I was like into Resident Evil and everything. And I would be unfortunately cast out as like the nerd or the banshee or something like that. But now it's like finding so many different females who are into Resident Evil who love all that kind of stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, you were picked on for the same thing too.
I
Okay, yeah,
wasn't
go
alone
us.
that whole time. I was just made to feel alone. You know, society does that a lot. We have a lot of there's good and bad aspects to when we talk about things like I guess what would they call it, like cancel culture, and kind of the gray shades between that and just experiencing the consequences of your own actions. I know that's been in the news a lot lately, where they say, "Is this just the comeuppance for what you say and do?" Because there will always be consequences for what you say and do. But is this something that we need to, are we teaching somebody the right lesson when we fire them? Are we not teaching them a lesson at all if we don't? I think that when we talk about how to use the social uh, it's a tool, right? So socializing is a tool, and so when we say like, how do we use that tool? Well, you can engage with somebody who's got maybe a bad point of view, and I promise I'm going to bring this back around to the video games, but you can engage with somebody who's got a bad point of view and say, I think I have the tools to bring you in. Or you can say, I'm going to disassociate with you because you got this bad point of view and we cast you out. Both are very valid things. I think there's a different tool for every job. We all have different gifts. I think there's that one guy, and I hate that I forgot his name, but what he collects KKK hoods by meeting with them, makes KKK members realize they're not racist. Now that works really well for him. It does not work well for everybody. Some people can't handle more than 5 seconds talking to a racist, and I totally get that. And you should block them and make them experience those consequences. I think there's not a single way to deal with these things. So when we talk about this, what you experienced in high school was being cast out for doing something that we now find out, we turn around, we're like, oh, everybody was doing this. Like the losers were the ones who didn't play video games. It's kind of this like waking up. So I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons fan, and it's one of those that I am lucky to grow up in an era where you didn't really get beat up for playing D&D. The people before me pioneered that. We're the ones that had to take those bruises before
Yeah,
everybody woke
exactly.
up and was like, "Oh, D&D is kind of cool." And not only is D&D kind of cool, it's got like that Tolkien feel. And not only does it have that Tolkien feel, it's something that even like cool things, cool systems and statistics have based their whole gameplay or their game design on this D&D design that came out all back then. It was always cool. It was just made to you were made to feel alone and isolated, and it's still something that we're not fully out of yet. Like you said, I mean, you still got picked on in high school, and you are a young pup for playing Resident Evil. That should not be happening. The people getting picked on should be these others. But when we carry this air about of us that we're better, which I mean, it still happens, even though you're not, and you're made to feel like you're in the majority. Like, oh, video games, who has time for that? And then you realize everybody's been making time for it. It's just the line people weren't, and it's like, oh well, they made themselves feel better by kind of creating this social structure of this. Oh, I'm on the in crowd because I haven't played these. Don't you want to be in the crowd? Don't you want to be cool because you haven't played video games? And then yeah, you'll learn
Yeah,
as you grow up, and you're just like,
exactly.
oh, those people were always losers. They just kind of created this very artificial social situation in which they were at the top of the hierarchy because they claim to do something that nobody else does. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I went to high school in like the what was it, the early 2000s. What was it? I was a freshman in 2006, graduated in 2010, and it was one of those things of where like being a quote unquote gamer girl in the MySpace era was really weird and a tumultuous time for a lot of us because when I look back at it in retrospect, guys who are gamers, it was these, and this is not me picking on the guys, by the way. So guys who are listening, and guy who is on podcast with me right now, please do not take offense to this. I promise I'm getting somewhere with this point. They had less of a hard time than we did, obviously, but I was always very loud and proud about the fact that I was a gamer, even when I would get shut down for it, even by teachers, because I got at, and I'll always remember this memory, my senior year of high school before graduation, they asked us what things are we most interested in that we would want to make careers out of. And I said, funnily enough, now that I look back at it, writing, gaming, and fashion. And people like started giggling, and I was like, "Hey, it's a career.
Tables have turned, haven't they? It turns out you were the pioneer. You know, it's almost always a lonely experience being the pioneer. I am lucky that I am kind of being carried. Like I said, there's still like a stereotype, but it's certainly not as bad as it used to be, right? You weren't. I read Masters of Doom, and reading what John Carmack and John Romero went through, and the stigmas that they faced for being into video game and video game design, and the opportunities that they had to turn down just to be like, no, this is what I'm passionate about. I understand what you're offering me is valid. I think both of them at one point were offered military experience. To be like, hey, we want you to create a simulator for troops and for the Navy or for the Army or what have you. And they just had to say no, over and over again, no. And they had to say it to their family and say, no, this is, I'm passionate about something else. I just am. And if it weren't for that light, I mean, these guys pioneered so many different things. I mean, from like looking up and down, to we don't know what video games would be like without them. And it's funny just because it had to exist in the face of extreme opposition in order for us to enjoy what we have today. And that will always be the case with that pioneer spirit, that you're just going to have to say, no, I'm aware I could make more money as an accountant. I'm aware I could go to school for another 8 years and become a doctor. Maybe I even could do it. Maybe I even have the focus to do it. Maybe I even have the talent to do it. But I'm going to say no because I want to do something else. And those are the people that shape the world, that make that ultimately those are the ones that end up finding happiness because they explored the path. To say, because you're always going to wonder about the shots that you don't take. This was always when people ask for recommendation for graduates, and it's funny, this has come up multiple times on a few different podcasts, but when they ask, I say, if you are graduating, follow what you want to do first. You can always go back and do the safe thing. The reason it's safe is because you can always go back and do it. You can go to college when you're 50. You can, and I'm not saying drop out of college, don't take it this way. In fact, maybe the pioneer thing for you would be to go to college when everybody else is saying, hey, stay home and work in the mine. Whatever it may be for you, there's going to be a lot of voices telling you to do something safe. But what's going to make you happy, even if you're not, the next, hey, I want to pursue baseball, even if you're not the next Babe Ruth, at least you'll explore it to its end. Because as somebody is now who is at the same age of football players who are retiring, I'm seeing people my same age be like, man, that could have been me. I just never explored it. I never took that shot. I was always lucky enough to be offered a shot and then say, oh, I'm not good enough at this. Hey, at least I know now, right? To just say, like, I took this shot and I'm so happy that I did, even though it didn't work out, because now I know I'm very bad at playing the guitar. I always wanted to try, and I tried, and I'm bad. And so you know what? It's okay. I have this very minor skill now of being able to read music, and I appreciate that. And at least I explored it to its end. So even if it's going to be, and people are going to look at you and say, I told you so, like, oh, I told you were never going to make it big, whatever. The thing is that's going to be in your brain till the day you die unless you explore it. So if there's something in your mind, absolutely explore it right now. Take a shot. This is how I got my job. I love sharing this story. I'll make it as brief as I can. But how I got my job was I knew I wasn't qualified to write for video games. My restaurant, I told you I was in restaurant management. It was Golden Corral. We were shut down, of course, because of the pandemic at the time. And I was like, what if I just decided to apply for something I have no qualifications for, that I just love? And I'm going to take this opportunity and I'm going to take this shot. And I did it. And it's been awesome. And it's so much better than what I was doing before. And I said it on the cover letter to say, hey, I'm aware of you're going to look at my job history and my references, and you're going to say, this kid has never been in the industry or written about games for his entire life. What is he doing applying here? And I'm just telling you right now that I really love it. And that cover letter got the attention of the right people, and that's what got me the job. And I think more people than you realize appreciate a cover letter like that, to say, hey, I know that what you asked for, I read the requirements, I saw it, I did. What I'm going to tell you that I don't have in that, I absolutely have in heart and passion, and it's what I want to do. And whether it's game journalism or an internship or whatever it is, that throwing a Hail Mary, they don't work out most of the time. That's the reason they're Hail Marys, right? But I'd rather you take those, as many as you feel like maybe I could and it would be so great if I did. I would say absolutely do that, and you will land, even if you land 1% of your Hail Marys, hey, do one a day. There's 356 of them in a year. You're gonna land one of them, and it's gonna be great. And yeah, shoot for the stars. I mean, it's funny because you read this advice in psychological textbooks, and you always you feel excited about it, and you're like, but that can't be me. That's somebody else. It's great advice, and it sounds exciting. It sounds like something out of a movie. Follow your dreams, but that's something for somebody else. We keep telling ourselves that's something for somebody else. Well, we're all somebody else to somebody else, and you're going to be the somebody else. Trust me, if it's a safe job, somebody else will take it and they'll be fine. If it's a job that you feel you have a unique perspective in, that you can do something that maybe other people can't, do it. The world needs it. The world needs people like that. How many times do you read Fortune 500, Forbes Top 100? I mean, what? 90% of them are first generation, self-made. I mean, old money dies fast. The world belongs to people that take a chance.
Exactly, and it's a really amazing sentiment too, because it reminds me of when I went to college for psychology. And at first I was like, oh yeah, I want to go into, to treat people who were not only vets, but who had schizophrenia, who had different, conditions like that, like dissociative identity disorder, all of that kind of thing. And I got to a certain point of where it got so politicized, the entire arena, I want to say, of psychology, that excuse me, it got to a point of where I was like, man, I could do something way better with my degree, but it's going to be unconventional. So I originally, and this is actually a story that I do like sharing as well, of where I was in my dorm room just fresh out of a breakup with my ex, right? I got into studying for one of my final midterms and then finals, because what we did was we had separate tests and labs all in one day, so we had to prep for what would be the equivalent of a midterm and a final all in one day. So I was prepping for that, and I was thinking, what do I want to do with this degree, completely not paying attention to what I was doing with my final work and everything like that. And I thought, okay, let me try YouTube again. I had originally done YouTube in 2011. It didn't work out because I was very self-conscious. And then I'm thinking, you know what? I want to take a different approach to it. And that's why I take gaming from a psychological standpoint, because I feel like no one ever talks about the psychology behind a video game at all, ever. So I told my parents this, and at first they were a bit trepidatious. They were like, what are you doing over here? And then now, almost 5 years I've been doing this, and they see that.
Wow, okay, my goodness, that's awesome. Psychology is one of those that plays into. Everybody's just kind of just now realizing that Frito-Lay's hires like hundreds of psychologists to talk about a potato chip. And so how much more, of course, is it in a video game when we're like, well, we are a medium of art that literally people have to interface with. How much more important now is psychology, you know? And not only with the gamer, but with the characters that you make in the game and how believable they are and how much we relate to them, and saying, and how well they paint a picture. Because I think there can be somebody, I think there's times, I know for me, while we're sharing X stories, I had a miserable divorce, absolutely terrible. I put way too many I was very unhealthy. I put way too many eggs in my marriage basket, and when the marriage fell apart, I had nothing. I was an empty shell of a person. I went through some serious psychological problems, and came out for it better. But I mean, it took a grieving process that should have taken a year, and it took me probably 6 years to recover from, because I had a mental disorder that I felt alone. I felt like there was no way. And I remember I went to a counselor when it finally got bad, to the point where where you're like, hey, driving off this bridge would feel amazing right now. Like, the only reason I'm doing it is because I'm like maybe scared of hell, maybe scared of like if my family would be disappointed, but I want to do this. And when I crossed that threshold, it was like, okay, you need to do something. So, I went, I saw a counselor, and it was funny because like first day he was like, oh yeah, this is normal. Hold on. Looked it up and was like, oh yeah, when you go through when your pain mechanisms outweigh your comfort mechanisms, here's some disorders. Here's somebody who went through exactly what you went through before. This disorder is kind of a limited, it's not widely known, but there's been, 1,000+ cases of it before. And like, for me, knowing that there was 1,000+ cases of it was such a comfort to me, to just be like, oh my gosh. I figured like I had some disease that they'd examine my brain and they'd call it like Hodeism. Like, oh, you've been diagnosed. Like, for like, I was the first one. Like, I don't know what's wrong with me, so some messed up thing. And then be like, oh no, you're not alone. You haven't been alone. Boy, I mean, it's funny, we're talking about video game pioneering. Mental health pioneering is something that's really going strong. I know since I've been alive, ADD turned out has come all the way from an excuse to get Ritalin to like a widely well-known, like, I wish I had been diagnosed earlier because I was not functioning, and now I am functioning as a human being. Yeah, I mean, you're the expert on the issue. My only experience is having gone through it.
Well, that's also experience too when you think about it, because like who better to get advice from than somebody who knows
but
about
ultimately
the subject,
I did. I'm not the one writing the textbooks. I'm certainly reading them and ingesting them and just saying, oh, this is how the human mind works. This is what I'm going through. I think it's funny we spend so much time denying what our brain is telling us to do. There's this fantastic book. If you're reading now, or if you're listening now, hopefully you're not reading the podcast. That'd be tough. If you are, I apologize for how rambly I am. If you are listening, though, there's this great novel. It's written by a journalist called Idiot Brain, and it's about what our brains, like things that brains do, and they're sometimes bad things, and it addresses things how like implicit bias and discrimination and whatnot like that come up in your brain without people meaning for it to happen, and I'll share a great example that just really resonated with me in the book. So I was managing a Texas Roadhouse in an area of town, and we had, and I loved the clientele, but there was absolutely this stigma going around with all the employees there that black customers don't tip. I'll just say it outright. And it is it's known enough phenomenon that if you make a joke about it in like Family Guy or something, that people don't bat an eye. They're just like, oh yeah, they don't tip. We all know this. Like, black customers don't tip. And it's this thing that your brain does that they shut down. They're like, well, that's a black customer. I'm not going to treat them as well because I know they're not going to tip. Now the thing is you don't have to say that out loud for your brain to make that true, because we measure intelligence by pattern recognition. For anybody who's taken an IQ test, you'll recognize this pretty quickly. It's a huge part of it is pattern recognition. What does this die look like when it's unfolded? You have to make an assumption about the backside of the die when you're given three, you see 3 squares of the die, and you have to make an assumption about those back 3 squares, and that's how we measure intelligence. How quickly do you pick up on a pattern? If I touch a stove once, realize it hurts. If I go to touch it again, my intelligence isn't where it needs to be, And so like there's ways that this helps us, right? This instinct that helps us, but here's how it hurts us. If my brain will immediately if you're pursuing intelligence, try to recognize a pattern as quickly as possible. So if you are stiffed, if you receive normal tips from 80 white people, you say, well, white people tip normally. If you get stiffed twice by a black person, then your brain's going to say black people don't tip because that's the pattern. And intelligent minds form that pattern quickly. So actually intelligent people have to fight bias, racism, prejudice even harder than, and I don't want to make it like there's smart people and there's stupid people, but I say this to explain the phenomenon, because the thing is most of us have driven to be intelligent. If you're listening to a podcast right now, you're probably an intelligent person because you care about information, right? And so the thing is you have to be extra vigilant about these biases creeping up, because your brain will attempt to establish a pattern as quickly as possible. If you see an actor that you don't like in a movie, instead of just saying our brain, you see that actor in another movie, you're going to write them off. It could have been a bad script. It could have been a bad day. They could have developed a lot. Doesn't matter. Your brain has a pattern of 1. I've seen this guy. He sucked. So his pattern is sucking, and I'll never see his movies again. And I strongly dislike this person forever, and I've written them off. And it's just a fascinating book. I'm sure I'm not doing it justice by using all the technical terms, and I'm sure you, having majored in psychological studies, I'm sure there's many terms that you can think that I'm glossing over here, but I'm certainly giving the amateur version. And I think it's something that people would do better to understand other people as well as understand themselves.
Yeah, and it's one of those things about, like you were saying about pattern recognition. I feel like there are people who can do it, who don't realize that they're doing it, but it's one of those things of where I feel like you have to be so conscious of your state of mind to be able to recognize that you're even making patterns to begin with.
It makes patterns where patterns don't exist, because the obvious answer, and I don't want to leave a sour taste in everybody's mouth. Black people do tip, right? It's just you have to treat them well, you have to treat them nicely, and it becomes a system, right? Where you will unintentionally give one table good service and unintentionally give one table worse service because of the color of their skin, right? This is how like systemic racism and stuff like continues even without us. Even if we're not racist, even if we're trying not to be, your brain just says, hey, you're going to get a better tip from that table. Give them all your focus. Those other guys can wait. When you visit a table and you visit them third every time, it's not because your brain is saying, oh, black people gross, I don't want to talk to them. It's your brain saying, well, you're not telling it to. This is just what it's passively doing, is saying, well, I want the most money, so this is what I'm going to do. And so we get this system where all of a sudden you get this whole group of people that we just kind of unintentionally treat worse than, we unintentionally treated our black customers worse than our white customers. I did not hire a single person who was overtly racist, never would, but it's this pattern in the brain that you got to watch out for. And it's something that I think that more people need to understand about themselves so that they know, because you have to combat it. The thing about implicit prejudices and biases, you can't just hope they go away. You have to fight them. You have to intentionally insert something into the pattern that makes your brain say, hey, this is how you kill it, And if you're one of those people that's feeling like, oh, this is just another guy who says like all white people are racist, that's not where I'm going with this, right? Like this is not, I'm not asking you to condemn your whiteness or anything stupid like that. What I am asking though is just to reevaluate, just think about where you're at. Everything you do it with intention. When you say, why am I turning down this job applicant? Be very specific in your brain and make sure that you're not like intentionally doing it. The other thing is and this is heartbreaking, this same pattern, it's not just a matter of being like, I'm white, so I'm better. This implicit bias against black people happens with black people. I had black servers that didn't like serving black people because of this same thing, right? And right, well, and it's heartbreaking. I mean, we can go all the way
It's
back
really
to
shocking, to be honest with you,
overturning Jim Crow
actually.
laws when they're looking at why is separate not equal, and they'd hold the doll, and all the black kids would be like, well, I want the white doll because they're prettier, because they're better, because they're smarter, because they have a better future, because they're. I mean, this implicit bias, like that's everybody struggles with that. This is all races. This is a human function. Race is ultimately a social construct that we make up. And we think we do it based on ethnicities and nationalities and observations, but science has vindicated that no, it's right. It's just purely pigmentation. It really that has nothing to do with anything. Sorry, but it's what it is. And so, but we attach because we are visual people. We live in a world, right? We live in a physical world. We live in a world where we see things and have to make these inferences in order to survive. And so the side effect, something that comes along with that kind of intelligence, is having to be intentional about your activities, otherwise falling into some really kind of, I mean, you look at some of the people that have scored highly on the IQ test, and I think it's amazing. We're about to talk about religion. They're like all different religions, which I think is incredible. We always think like all the smart people must be a single faith. No, they're not. Like, look at the top 10 people. There's like 3 Christians. None of them are the same kind of Christian. There's like an atheist. The highest score ever was Shinto, I believe, and she was incredible. Second, unfortunately, highest by a dude was some like racist bodyguard or like bouncer or something like. And you're just like, oh, ooh, gross. But this is the thing: is
Oh,
intelligence
wow.
does not make you moral. It just that comes from someplace else. And so that's something that we just have to kind of watch out for. I think, especially if you're a podcast listener, to say, man, I'm feeding myself a heavy dose of information all the time. I'm really quick at picking up patterns. I'm a really smart person. What are kind of some things that come up? What are the downsides of intelligence? And these are some of the things that kind of got to watch for.
And that's the thing, like you actually, you're bringing up so many good points, because it's like I even remember when I was a waitress in, what was it? Oh gosh, it was a pub that was like in the college town I was going to, and I would be a pub and I would be a part time entertainment for the bar and everything, and I would always see a lot of the servers treat black customers worse than they treated white customers or even
Uh-huh.
Hispanic customers, to be quite frank. And a lot of people in the town knew I was Jewish as well, and a lot of people even treated me worse than they treated a lot of other people, because they just assumed that, oh well, you don't eat ham or you don't like this, and I was like, unless I tell you something specifically, then please cook my food with this. So it's one of those things of where, like, seeing it firsthand and completely understanding where you're coming from, it's sad, the kind of world that we live in where that kind of systemic racism happens and it exists, but it's also something of where we're, on the flip side, intellectual enough to combat that and say, hey, you know what, we need to stop this and nip it in the butt before it goes any further.
Yes, this is a great segue into religion entirely, because I think people will think, and we should think, right? This is how our brains work: is we hear about a certain faith, and we immediately draw certain conclusions about believers of that faith based on our experiences, and we will write off people, because the thing about the idiot brain is that it loves confirmation bias. It every time, and the thing is it's not. I think the reason we love confirmation bias isn't necessarily a bad thing. In a way, it comes from a place of seeking comfort. Was my experience real? I talked about already how less lonely I felt when other people had my psychological disorder, right? When somebody was able to point at it and be like, oh, okay, so this is the thing. You had somebody on the show with Asperger's, right? And I love the way you pronounce it too. It's like Asperger's, which is so much better than the American pronunciation of Asperger's. Like, come on. But
Yeah,
but yeah, like
exactly.
asparagus. I was like, oh yeah, it sounds like asparagus. It's much more relatable this way. It's much more tolerable for me. But like, I loved how he shared his experience, and that we're in an era where we can share those experiences, because it's common enough that we're like, okay, it's being on the like I remember, I mean, heck, it's still some circles it is, but just telling somebody they're autistic was kind of a common insult like 3 or 4 years ago. Just being like, oh yeah, these autistic gamers screaming at me through the whatever. And we've grown enough to realize how wrong that is. But we have certain assumptions that we make about people with, you know, Asperger's, or this mental disorder or disease, or this limitation. We tend to associate them all with a certain activity, whereas some people that cannot be their experience at all. So when we talk about something like faith, that's heavily informed by personal opinion, it's okay to seek out that your experience was a normal thing. To say that, hey, okay, why is it that I don't like, let's use one that doesn't pertain to us very much. I don't like Muslims very much. Why is that? Okay, well, it's because they're terrorists and they blow stuff up and they hate our freedoms. They hate my freedoms, and it's like, okay. And can you find Muslims that are terrorists that do hate your freedoms? Yes, you certainly can. And so if that is your experience if you lost somebody in 9/11, or you had some, you are probably, and it doesn't make it right. I want to be very careful with my wording here. You are justified in your anger. That doesn't mean that your anger has led you to a correct conclusion about Islam. And it's one of those that you really have to kind of be careful with, because you want to say, like, on one hand, yes, you should explore, where does this hatred come from? Where from these individuals? But you also need to accept, and this is something that brains naturally do, new information that comes up that says, hey, my experience with Islam has been this. And then you look into it and you find all these, peaceful people, that believe in it too, and say, well, maybe my generalization, maybe my attempt to make millions of individuals around the world who have this faith and attempt to generalize them into they're all terrorists and they hate my freedoms, maybe that's inaccurate. Maybe that there is a contingency that is worth addressing there. But if I expand that generalization to all of them, I've gone wrong. And that is my brain telling me something that I want to hear.
Yeah, and then that's the thing about, like, when I chose to be an atheist, because it's like I get several questions about why I chose it. And I was like, it's something of where I grew up with being able to choose what religion I wanted to. Because to give you a little bit of background, to give people who are listening a little bit of background, my mother, she was a devout Christian for the entire time she was growing up. She grew up in a Catholic Irish household, and her entire family was Irish. Like both ways, you had Irish, European. It was really interesting to see. But when she met my dad, she converted to Judaism, because the way that she puts it is she didn't want to teach me something that she herself did not understand. So she understood Judaism more so than she understood Christianity, even though she grew up with it her entire life, and there were some parts of it that she was like, I'm not too sure about this, or I'm not too sure about this. I do understand this, but I'm not so sure about this. And my dad explained to her, like, hey, I'm a Jew. I was born and raised a Jew. He almost went into a concentration camp when he was a child. In where he was staying. He was born in Morocco, and he escaped during the time of, like, the Nazi regime, on the potato boats with his family, his two siblings, brother and sister, and his mom and his dad. Then he went to a kibbutz, and thankfully he didn't have to go into a concentration camp, and neither did his family. But it's one of those amazing things of where you hear the heritage, and you hear that, hey, I was born this way, but I'm an atheist, and that's kind of where I get it from, because it's like, there were even people up at college I went to St. Francis University, so there was a Catholic university, and people were like, why are you agnostic, or why are you this, or why are you that? And I tried going into faith. I really honestly did, because, like, I remember going to Mass for the first time, wanting to explore and see what the religion had to offer. and what everything had, what was basically the religion about. I read the Bible, I read, the Torah, I read the Kabbalah that my dad had and everything, and I thought, this is a really great history, and it's a really great story. And for me, I just couldn't wrap my brain around something that I couldn't see or tangibly prove the existence of. So for me, I have just like a scientific brain. So if I can't see it, it doesn't exist, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. These, I mean, you're touching on so many things. So the thing is your personal experience. So you shared with me a personal experience where you're just like, man, this is my personal experience with Christians, right? And I think it's important that we need to establish that is a lot of people's experience with Christianity. That's not my experience with Christianity, but that's probably why I still have my faith. You know what I mean? Whereas
Yeah.
you have had
Yeah.
an experience with faith that does not reflect my own. And I think that we need to look at all of those things and kind of combine it together and say, what are we really looking at here? What do we have? Is it for me? Is it not for me? And I think that, so I majored in theology. I guess now is probably the right time to talk about that. And so studying religion, I find it all so fascinating that I think it is just so, it is so interesting. I think for me, religion is something that you have to have an opinion on. And it's going to shape a lot about how you see the world, because we can try not to. But when you've got something as consequential as, for example, heaven or hell, right? Or, then you probably need to commit some thought to it, right? We're talking about eternity, and when we're talking about, and even if you reject the concept of eternity, just the concept of your own consciousness, how did that come to be? How did this consciousness get inserted into this body that I have? What makes me different than an animal? What makes me different than this? Why is it that human beings have a single genus and a single species? Why, and certain things that will make you question. I think that all information is paradoxical. A paradox is something that doesn't seem like it makes sense on its surface, but makes sense when you iron it all out. And so I think you can take any Bible verse out of context and make it look bad. And then, but that's the paradox, right? And this is one of the reasons that I do believe in Christianity, is because it acknowledges the worst and the best elements of human nature, and kind of taps on, the greater truths into this human nature that I have. I love to borrow this story. So, you have a history in Judaism, so you'll appreciate this. When the slaves were freed from Egypt, and not quite freed voluntarily, but when they were released into the wilderness, they didn't immediately become self-sufficient, ready to go people. They didn't find that promised land right away and were just like, oh yeah, we're good to go. We are all eager to fill in our lives with pharaohs, with golden calves, to say that. And it's funny how, after 1 year in the wilderness, it's like, yeah, slavery was bad, but it was better than this, and so often we treat ourselves that way as human beings. And we just say, this is bad, but, I imagine what could be worse. My head tells me that things could be worse, so I'm sure it could be worse. So I'm going to go with that, and I'm going to demand some kind of slavery. I'm very much into liberation of thought, and free thinking. And there are Christians and atheists alike who have a history of saying no free thought. You look at what happened. I mean, we can attribute. I mean, you look at the Crusades. You look at the devastating history of Catholicism in the world, and this is not a slight to Catholics, because, like I said, you weren't a part of this. But you look at this devastating history, and it's funny, and this is why I give modern Catholics a pass. It's not that they excuse their history; it's that ultimately all of this was undone by a Catholic who actually read the scriptures and was like, "You guys aren't living a Christ-like life. What you are telling people is not what our scriptures say." And they kind of giggle, and they're like, "Yeah, we know. That's why we don't teach them to read." And it's like, no, we're teaching people to read right away. This can't happen anymore. Ultimately, Catholicism condemned the evil elements of Catholicism. And I'm sure you, as an atheist, would not look at the social Darwinism of, World War I, World War II, the Holocaust, the USSR, the Holodomor, and look at these things and be like, oh yeah, those are atheists I totally relate to. Like, this is, did they happen yet? And so like as Christians, you have to kind of contend with that. And as an atheist, it's something that you have to contend with. And that's just the nature of humanity. It's not that there are no truths or that nobody's right. It's just that this is the nature of the world, that nothing is really clear. When we talk about these things. I love, there was this great debate between Bill Nye and Ken Ham about kind of creationism versus evolution, or it was like kind of young Earth versus old Earth. And it's a fantastic debate. And one of them, Bill Nye is like, yes, there are some things right now that science doesn't yet have the answers for. They do appear, if you want to use them in your light, they look like creationism. But I still am not a creationist. It's not like you have a video camera set up that shows God creating it either. Ultimately, we're looking at these sets of facts and we're doing the best we can with what we got. We're going to say, like, this really looks right, this really looks wrong, and kind of do the best we can. And I love the idea of religion in practice as opposed to religion in a set of laws. And this is something that actually, that it's funny that, Christianity, which was founded in, Judaism, this is something that the Jews understood very well. And that it wasn't like, oh, these are, there were people writing laws down, but those people kind of sucked. You kind of see who they ended up being. They're the same people who wrote about like stoning the gays, and then God in like the next chapter they'll be like, and then we talked with God about it. God was like, so don't stone the gays. What are you guys doing again? Like, what are you guys doing in my name? What's happening here? You can be
Exactly. And it gets to a point of where like you see so many contradictions within the religion, but then you have good Christians like yourself. You have, good Christians like, friends who I have met in college and, in everyday life, and you see the goodness that the religion can bring. And I want to clarify something for people who might think, oh crap, an atheist, here she goes. But it's one of those things that people misunderstand. A lot of atheists don't hate the religion. That's not the thing. Like, we don't hate the concept of Christianity or Buddhism or Judaism or any of the religions. It's the person that acts out the religion in the evil way. And that's the thing. It's all about the person's way and how they kind of idealize it or how they take it too far. It was never the concept of a religion that had me, in with issues or anything like that. Because when we look at it at its core, it's quite a beautiful thing, actually, because we know what Christ died for. We know everything about the goodness that is of Christianity, of Buddhism, of, even Maoism or anything like that. But we see the person, like, the Westboro Baptist Church. They take Christianity a little bit too far.
I mean, I'll push back a little on this. And here's the reason. Is because I feel like they haven't taken their Christianity far enough. Right? Because I would never, like, when I read the scriptures, here's the thing. My bigoted sentimentality about homosexuality or about nationalism, all that was created in man-made church and man-made social concepts, and basically people hijacking the religion and telling me and teaching me what was in the Word. Because as soon as I decided to get extreme with my faith, then all of a sudden I come across the Bible verses that says, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." There are 3 different occasions, and because we have each of the Gospels is written out, right? So we have 4 different accounts of the same Gospels. So basically, you have 12 different iterations of Christ's apostles coming and asking him, "How do we get into heaven?" And 0 times does he mention, believe in me, or get baptized, or do all these weird things, And all 12 times he says it's the way you judge others and the way you treat others and the way you forgive others that will come back to forgive you. The stick that you use to measure others gets used to measure you. For me, that's an extreme Christian that lives up to that. That says, I am not going to judge anybody. Because if I judge somebody even a little bit, I love this example. Because a lot of people forgive this way. It kind of teaches a lot about Christ's forgiveness versus how humans tend to forgive. I'm now there's keeping yourself safe. Obviously, you can forgive somebody who abused you and not keep dating them, right? I mean, this is this separate thing. But if you say like I forgive you, am I going to treat you poorly because of it? I might do things to keep myself safe, like in the abuse situation, but I am not going to hold this over your head anymore. I'm not going to treat you as somebody who is filthy. Otherwise, because what happens if you have any element of sin, any inkling of sin, can't exist in the sight of God with what we're taught, right, in the scriptures. And we say like, okay, so zero amount of sin can exist in the sight of God. And if we judge somebody even a little bit, even an iota, even just say like, you know what, I'm not going to invite my homosexual cousin to our wedding. I love him, but I'm not going to invite him to the wedding just because, it's going to create a little bit of a thing. Then that one teeny little bit of thing is going to be used to judge us for an teeny weeny little thing that we do when it comes to later on. Now, what's the type of forgiveness that I want from Christ? Do I want this open arm hug, like, welcome back, my son? Or do I want this, like, I guess I forgive you. I guess it's okay. All right, this is how human-centered. All right, I guess you can be around. Just don't be around me, and you're just like, no, nobody wants that, right? So, like, for me, an extreme Christian is somebody who says, I'm not going to judge anybody. I am not going to spend a single ounce on that. And yet, we have a stigma, and it's well-deserved, that Christians are judgmental, among the most judgmental people on the planet. When 12 different times Christ says to even get into heaven, you have to forego being judgmental, right? Forgive your neighbor as many times as you want to be forgiven, to let it all go, to just say like, I mean, this is a great example. Christ delivers such amazing examples, and it's funny because we talk about his examples through his actions even more so than his words. But like with like a prostitute, so many Christians waste their time arguing about prostitution and saying, "Oh, we need to make it illegal. You shouldn't have the right to sell your own body. Oh, you should, I'm just a moral guy." And I do it for their sake. And you can tell yourself all kinds of things, right? To say, I'm doing it for their sake. I just don't want to see women in this industry. I just don't want to see, I believe that people should have more autonomy and they shouldn't sell it for money, however you want to dress it up, right? But ultimately, Christ's example, he did not once have to say to Mary Magdalene, you're a prostitute, knock it off. If you really have a distaste for prostitution, what did Christ do? He gave her an alternative. He offered her a new community, a new example to follow. And so for me, that is what radicalized Christianity is. When I see Christians that are like, oh, you better stand up for the flag, or you better, you better not enter in that, you better not make the choice to be homosexual. I'm like, where did you guys lose it? Where did you guys drop Christ from Christianity? It's in the name, for goodness sake.
Yeah, exactly. And there are some Christians who don't even realize that Christ was a Jew. And it's really fascinating to see, because I was like, hello, knock knock, this guy was Jewish, right?
He was Jew, but he was a very white Jew. Haven't you seen the pictures? He was the whitest of white Jews.
And, there's actually a topic that I want to get into. It might be a little bit controversial, but you know what? We are both like-minded individuals. We're both adults that can have a coherent conversation, so I feel like I can go for it. There has been questions that I've had regarding the Christian faith for years that I never understood. And since you're well-versed, you have a major in theology, so I thought, you know what? Let me ask you. And it might be interesting for others who are listening to know about this as well. There's I don't want to say a system is the wrong word. There is the thing that in Christianity of where if you say Christ is your Lord and Savior, you take him as your Savior before you die, then you go to heaven. And I always had a bit of an issue with that, and clarify for me if I mess up anything, because I'm not well versed in the religion, considering the fact that I am myself not Christian. But does that mean that if someone like Hitler or Osama bin Laden were to announce Christ as their Lord and Savior, they would get into heaven?
So faith without works is dead is another verse in the scriptures there, which I think does not receive nearly enough attention. Here's the thing, and so I am. Boy, I mean, well, we're talking about controversial subjects. Let me talk about another one. So I am an anarchist, right? I don't believe in the rule of law as a moral judge of character. I don't believe it's the best way to run the world. I don't believe that politicians can make better decisions for people's lives than people can make for their own lives. And I understand that it's a complicated road to get there peacefully, and you can have whatever you want about that. But I believe that this underscores kind of a truth. So Leo Tolstoy, there's this great book called The Kingdom of God is Within You, and talks about how really you can't be a Christian and a nationalist. You can't be a Christian, and really kind of drove a lot of my feelings towards anarchy, where I just kind of said, like, you can't make these pledges to the nation when your heart is pledged to God, And so I kind of said, like, oh, okay, well, this is the nature of the universe, really, is that I can't. Is that there's kind of this, we want to be black and white. We want to be about rules of law. But if you read the scriptures, there's nothing black and white about about God. He gets angry, he gets jealous, he gets sad, he gets happy. I mean, think about this, because this is important to note. If you're a Christian, your God is not a robot where you check all the right boxes and you're done and you did it, right? That's a human thing. We want the comfort, right? I love checklists. When I wake up and start my day, as a highly successful person, I have this checklist to go through that I just say, like, this is what I'm going to hit. If I do all these things, I had a successful day. So when I'm talking about getting into heaven, what I prefer to do, my humanity says, I want to check all these boxes and then I get to heaven. I've been baptized. I had my last rites. I believed in my heart. I confessed with my mouth. I did, blah, 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 and I filled out all the boxes, so now I'm saved. I did it. Right? That is absolutely 100% not the way God operates. We have examples in the Bible itself of Christians who have confessed with their mouths, believed with their hearts, who did the baptism, who turned on the faith, who ended up going to hell. And then we have examples of people on the cross who, I mean, Christ was crucified. It's funny, we call them criminals on the cross because nobody wants to address their sins. They're most likely murderers, right? I mean, if you're getting crucified at this time, that they've probably done something more heinous than steal a loaf of bread, right? So these are not the great people of society. And yet the one guy does not even say, like, hey, I believe everything you said. He's just like, hey, when you get to your kingdom, like, just keep me in your thoughts, like, in what everything I went through. And Christ says, today you will be with me in paradise. He did not acknowledge that Christ was the Savior. He did not get baptized. And yet, Christ says, you get into heaven. And so what we have here is that Christ judges people by their hearts. And a heart is not something that we can back up with except by our works. Right? So the problem that you get, I guess, with what you have there is, Bin Laden and Hitler, their hearts and works did not, if their heart was ever in the right place, which it was not, their works would sync up. Now, that's not to say that Christians are perfect people that never sin, but that is to say that if your heart is after God's, and that's ultimately what we get judged on, that will show through in your works. You will create more healing than destruction, as far as like a net goes. Does a great apple tree sometimes deliver a bad apple? Yes, but that's certainly like not frequent, right? They refer to it as the roots of the tree, right? If you plant the seed in good soil, if it is a good tree, if it's a good seed, and you plant it in good soil, it's going to give you generally good fruit. That doesn't mean sinless. We're all going to have that mistaken fruit up there. But by and large, people are going to look back on your life and be like, wow, that guy created a lot of healing. That was great fruit. What are the fruits of Hitler and bin Laden? They are not good, right? This is why I have no problem at looking like it, like Pope Urban IV, or like other, as a Christian, I look at these other guys and I can say pretty confidently that they were not Christians. They may have had the title, but they certainly didn't embrace what Christ was about. In fact, would oftentimes go above and beyond to make sure people could not find out what Christ was about so that they could get away with what they did. And this especially goes for Hitler, right? Which I think it's funny. Hitler's a great example. Not only does everybody hate him, But he did some atheist things with the social Darwinism that you would hate, and he did some Christian things by dressing it up as like some kind of like, this makes you pious to hate Jews, that I hate, right? And so he's like the perfect example of like the bad egg for both of our faiths, right? Where you just are like, that guy does not represent what I think. When I talk about, when you talk about, atheism or Darwinism or evolution, you're like, I'm going to distance myself from Hitler big time. And that is what I do as a Christian as well, to be like, anything that he might have like disguised as Christianity was absolutely not from that scene. Joe Louis v. Max Schmeling, incredible story, boxing. American, a black guy in America versus a Jewish guy in Europe. And gosh, if you want to talk about people who were in a bad situation, being a black guy in America growing up in like the 1920s and 30s versus being a Jew during the same time period in Germany, both bad. And these were considered the two most athletic people on planet Earth. And the whole world, both Christians and atheists, thought that they were genetically inferior. And it's funny that both their countries spent such a great deal of time. You look at, so go ahead and if you have access to a computer right now, look at the Joe Louis fight and look at the boxing match and look at the work that they do, the lighting that they do to make Joe Louis look white during that match, because he's black, black, and we in America wanted to believe he was white. And then you look at the same thing and look at what they did with Max Schmeling to make him look not Jewish, even though his last name is Schmeling. The guy was Jewish, right? Like he was not. It's not like one of those like maybe Jewish on my mom's side or something. The guy was Jewish, and these were the two best athletes in the world at their time. And
oh wow, I'm just looking at it now, and it's like wow.
Yeah, and their countries like wanted to dismiss what made them, to dismiss their identities, to say that, well, he can't be, because we know the best people in the world are white people, or we know the best people in the world are Christians, or we know the best people in the world are atheists, or whatever. And this is just something, I guess I'm glad that we're wrapping this up. I guess religion, as far as it combines with like psychology, because this is what we want to tell ourselves, is that the best people in the world are just like us, that I am in that category of the best people in the world, and that it's like, man, it is okay. All that diversity comes together to give you something incredibly beautiful, that there is a reason. For me, I don't mix my politics with my faith. The reason I don't do that is because for me, Christ didn't do that. And any attempt to implement that on a government level is damaging and destructive. You look at how beautiful Christianity is, and with the things that I've said, and some people are listening to this, and I'm sure saying, that's not my experience at all. My experience with Christians is them forcing me to put the 10 Commandments on my government building, or them putting in God we trust in my dollar, or attempting to put the state, or some type of authority to their Christianity, when ultimately the authority is this invisible God that we have to have faith in. It's not meant to be Christianity is not meant to be implemented through politics. Politics has a crazy way of destroying everything it touches. And I know I'm getting kind of hard into my anarchy here, but you look at what like Darwin said, and then you look, as soon as politicians got a hold of it, they're like, we can use this to sterilize black people, to euthanize retarded people. We can use this to claim that our country has better genetics than the country next door. Because and it's like, dude, that is not anything close to what Darwin said. But what you did is you took it and you perverted it and you made it really gross. And so a lot of people, I think, will listen to a podcast like this and say, I relate to one or the other experiences more than the other. Or, more likely, I have my own experience with both groups entirely that influences all that decision. And all of this needs to be rolled into some kind of universal truth and understanding, to say that both of us can be right at the same time. To say that your experience with Jews and Christians and my experience with Jews and Christians and atheists and just our experience with all faiths have to all be taken together, because your brain will tell you reaffirm what you already know, what you believe already, and ignore and dismiss, this information that doesn't seem to fit the mold. When you say, well, when you find out that there's Christians or atheists that can be loving and good and compassionate, does that, if that conflicts with what you know, then it's time to know more, to know more people, Christians, atheists, Muslims, I mean, just all faiths from all over the world have some air of validity, and odds are, if you demonize them based on a couple of cherry-picked verses, or hey, Darwin said this, haha, or hey, I found this thing in the Old Testament that talks about making women on their period walk like a football field length away from us or something because periods are scary. That odds are it's a cherry-picked verse that's out there to make it look bad, and that's probably not why people believe in the faith. And if you do see people that maybe they need to, I would challenge them to get more into their faith. I think that whatever their faith may be, because I find that a lot of these ones that stick around, there's a lot of state-created, of course, faiths that were kind of cults that died out because there was no elements of truth to them. It was just like, this president is the best president, and we should make a religion based on this president. Oh, that president's dead, and everything he believed died with him. The religions that have stuck around really have some things to offer because people turn to them for legitimately good reasons. And can they be weaponized? Yes, everything can be weaponized, to turn into something terrible. I think, you would call it like extremism. I know I pushed back a little bit, but I understand what people mean when they talk about the Westboro Baptists being extremists, right? Like, they're insane. They're ludicrous. I cannot do enough to dismiss them and their ideas as non-Christian, as repugnant bigotry. That's something that Christ himself would be very sickened by.
Though, and I think that honestly, just just to say this, like, I feel like that's not true Christianity. Like, the thing is that, like, we look at that and we see that as basically kind of like a cult in its own way. We don't really see it as something where we take it for any sort of value at all, because these are the people who are protesting,
Yeah.
Soldiers' funerals. So whenever we look at it, we're just like, what is this thing that has kind of tainted what the purpose of Christianity was?
It's funny because they hold these signs that would say, like, God hates fat, and I just read those signs and I'm like, man, God would hate you. Like, I'm ultimately we read the Bible and find out that God loves the quote unquote fags, and God hates the people that are ripping on the fag. Sorry, but like, that's, you burn yourself out, and faith is individual. I guess not to, I do want to answer your question. Faith is individual, and it is for everybody. That when somebody says, well, what do you mean by, we aren't we use words because we're social people, but faith is more than just words. I mean, almost every concept is more than just words. We use words to try and tailor a concept. People have different ideas of what, I mean, try having a conversation about socialism or capitalism. One person's, do any two people have the same definition of those two words? Like, and I look at the dictionary and I'm like, I'm not sure anybody
not at all
is actually using even what the dictionary says it is. Like, I don't think anybody from either side, like it's all individual to them, right? Now we use these words like capitalism and socialism to try and generalize, to try and peg something down. But this is important to the larger scope when we talk about religion as well, is to say that this is how faith works on an individual level. Your faith, your even if it's atheism, your ideas about how humanity got here and that higher power are going to be different. I can't generalize every atheist. I can try, just because we're human beings and we have to try to have conversations to talk about atheists in general or Christians in general. But ultimately, it's going to be different person to person. One of the things that I've always loved about Christianity is how it's my relationship with Christ. It is not just these tenets. It's how Christ and I interact, and how that has developed, and how that, where that has brought me as a person. When I pray and I speak with Christ, what direction am I being pointed in? What do his words tell me to do? What is he giving me to do? Because we are all different people. We are all, this is I love Christianity because it explains it in a way that's not some overarching, and I guess I should say almost every religion is like this, which is why I really love the concept of faith study in general. But I guess because I am a Christian, I'll use a Christian example. And it's that it recognizes that every person is different, that the same thing that works for one person is not going to work for another. And it talks about this body of Christ and how we have hands and eyes and ears and feet and, and ultimately everybody's got some makeup to make a full body. Like the goal is to become the body of Christ, to heal and preach love and compassion throughout the entire world, and that we are supposed to become this body of Christ. But not every single one of us has the same gifts. People who are great seers might not be also great listeners. Well, that's okay because we combine forces and we have one person who's the eyes and another person who's the ears. And we say like, okay, just excel at what you are made to excel at. I mean, this touches even at the very first thing we opened the podcast with, which maybe is the best place to come at to make it go full circle. But to say that, man, this is who you are made to be. We comprise a humanity. Ultimately, I recognize the whole world as my brothers and sisters in Christ, right? But I recognize them, and I think I would, and I dare not speak for the atheists, but most of them even recognize. I think one of the cool realizations that we've had that scientific studies have shown is that we are one of like the only species out there that did not get multiple species. I guess we are a single genus and a single species as humanity, which is a really cool thing, that we are all the same, that we all comprise this larger single body, of humanity, and that we all work together. And it's just important to do what you do. When I say, like, for me, there was a time when I thought I was going to go into like clerical work, into teaching about faith and stuff, and life called me in a different direction. I wasn't able to pursue that route, and ultimately I'm much happier writing about video games, so it all worked out for me. But I thought that like maybe the only way to speak about God was to be a part of the clergy, or be a priest or a pastor or something like that. And then I realized that, man, God makes us all to function together. And so one of the best things I can do is fulfill my service to humanity in whatever gift that God has given me. And if that's writing and video games, then it's writing and video games. And that's my role in this world. That's my God-given role in this world. The talents that he gave me. We have this parable of the talents in the scriptures where God gives it to him. And the things that he rewards the people that invested their talents well. And the one that didn't, who buried his talent, he's like, what did you do? Why did you bury your talent? This was like the biggest mistake you could have possibly made, is that I invested in you. I gave you a gift, and you just chose to bury it because you were afraid. I think it's a great parable because the person is specifically afraid about losing the one talent. You're not going to lose when you invest it. If it's a talent, that it's not lost on you. Use your gifts and use your skills. I think for me, it's something that I share a kinship with atheists with, because I think that they also recognize that we are one genus, one species. We are all here. We are all different. We're all individuals. And by living our best lives, we fulfill our greatest purpose. And I can use words like God and Christ. There's this great quote, I think it's St. Francis de Assisi, who says, talk about God often, use his name seldom.
Yeah, I heard that used in school all the time. I know that quote.
Yeah, it's a great quote, because I don't have to be down your throat about Christ all the time. Ultimately, somebody can be living a great Christ-like life having never heard the gospel. They just simply, because the nature of the universe isn't what the Bible tells us about the world. It's what the world tells us about, it's not what God tells us about the world. It's what the world tells us about God. If the world is God's handiwork, then we study the world. Right. This is why I am also a very left-brain scientific type person. Faith is a difficult one for me because I think people use the term blind faith, which, by the way, appears exactly 0 times in the scriptures. I don't know where blind faith got off. I think that was probably one of those, we want you to believe, and please don't look at the book because it's going to contradict what I say. But, blind faith is not a real thing. And so for me, I've always struggled with that, because I find that God, for me, the truth about God exists in science. I have always felt that that these are companions, that they do better synchronized than they do desynchronized. And ultimately, if you're doing something that tells you to defy what you know, defy what you see, then that's probably not the right thing, because God made everything you see, right? God made everything that you hear. And so if I am, and there's a lot of Christians that do this, that try to convince you that it's like, oh, science is just out to get you or out to be the big bad bully. It's like, but God made this, didn't he? And if God made everything in the universe, including the way scientific processes occur, I mean, heck, you believe in a Bible that where God creates light before the sun, and then's like, wait a minute, I got to organize this better. You know, that like, okay, so God ends up having to design science. Why then would you reject science? You know, why then would you reject these great truths, you know, that I think strike atheists and Christians on the same level, that we are all a single genus and a single species as humanity. And we do much better working together as brothers and sisters than we do as enemies and starting these countless wars that, you know, that just waste lives, and they just hurt people. And it's just so antithetical to everything that, I mean, it's funny because I talk about atheist belief. It's not like there's a belief system out there, but simply the atheist belief is that, you know, if there is no higher power commanding these things, that then we might as well heal, right? We might as well do what's best for everybody, right? I mean, we might as well live the best lives possible.
And that's the thing too, of where, like, you know, and I don't speak for all atheists, because God knows, you know, I'm not like a lot of atheists out there, but it's one of the things of where, like, and I think this is a good time to you know, maybe to close on this subject with this, where and it's interesting to think about too, because, like, I always think of religion as kind of this thing of where it has beautiful concepts, and like you said, you know, there are different things that aren't even in scriptures, you know, that people kind of make up, and it's man-made, of where, like, you know, don't look or else it's going to contradict what I'm saying, so please don't you know, have the balls to look at the, you know, the scriptures and actually see what's going on, right? So whenever I think about it, it's like a lot of atheists completely just crap on all Christians, and I'm thinking to myself, that's not really the way to go about it if you want equality and you want less hatred. If you're doing that sort of hatred, you're basically like the Christians that you're saying that you hate so much. So whenever I look at it, I'm just like, you know what, while I may not like a lot of religion or what it does to some people, I can respect the fact that people choose it. And I think I remember whenever you were talking to me under my tweet about this concept, I was like, I can appreciate it. I can understand the fact of why people choose religion, of why people really not hold on to it, but really respect it, because it started in a really respectable place until it got kind of twisted by some people. Not all people, some people. I want to make that very, very clear, everybody. So whenever I see it, I'm like, yeah, I can respect your choice. Just as long as it doesn't harm anybody or impinge my freedom of choice or rights, then hey, we're good.
Yeah. Well, this is it touches on like how we interact with people. We want to believe that outrage is like the greatest feeling ever, that if I'm outraged by something, everyone else will naturally be outraged by it, and then this will fix everything in the world. By creating all this anger and outrage, that this will do it. Ultimately, it's funny because I find that the words, like, so if I were to talk to somebody from the Westboro Baptist Church and they were to say, where did I go wrong? I could say, like, everywhere and everything, you know, and you being born was where it went wrong, right? Like, I think that's the popular one. Like, if I were to make a tweet that got a lot of likes, you know, I'd be like, you being born is where it went wrong. That's the easy way, right? It doesn't fix anything, but it makes us all feel good because I love to dunk on them. You know what I mean? We all want to see posterizing in basketball is pretty cool, and we all want to posterize some pretty crappy people, right? And so, like, we want to see them posterized, but ultimately, if we want to see them changed, I think the better way to do it is to be like, well, let's look up what Christ would say about what you're doing right now. Like, ultimately, you are undermined by what you're doing. You know, I think that the best way, I have seen two types of ways to, when people talk to atheists about like social Darwinism. And I think that the one way is to be like, haha, they love to be disparaging towards atheists and call it like their faith or their religion or, whatever. Like, and really it's the absence of that, but it's hard to call it that. But, you just say like, oh, look at you, you say you have no faith and look at all this, look at the Holocaust, look at the Holodomor. Oh, my religion never hurt anybody. And you make fun of them, right? That has not made less atheists. Like, if you're listening to this and you want to like convert an atheist, that's a really bad way to go about it, because ultimately you are not pro-Holocaust and pro-Holocaust.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So obviously you've disassociated with that. So for me to hold you to that standard is like holding a Christian to the standard of like where you find where like the Levites decided it would be okay to stone gay people. We've rejected it. It's done. Like that's dead and buried. God condemns it in the same book. So like, and so like for me, when I read about social Darwinism, the best way to contradict that is by looking at other works of Darwin and by being like, well, here's other things that he had considered that maybe might say that like, hey, humanity is really different than the rest of the animal kingdom. And here's how they're different. And here's why it's important not to create all this like hatred and contempt and, all this, because then these are kind of the doomed patterns that we're following. Survival being the most adept to change is one of those that I feel is like, I mean, if that were in the Bible, I would be happy about it. Like I just feel like it's such a higher truth, that you could teach that, and you reach it by kind of holding them true to the greatest parts of their own faith, because usually that's what they're trying to do as well. It's even if we know a lot of bigoted Christians, we do have some that are proud of their bigotry, and if you can't associate them, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, by all means, disassociate. Like, if you're not going to tell them they're wrong, then you probably have a moral obligation to disassociate, right? If you're not actively trying to convince them that their evils are wrong, then you probably have a moral obligation to cut the cord. But if you can, then talk to them as somebody who understands them. When I talk to an atheist, I think the reason you and I can have such good interactions about this is because you don't talk to me like the same Christians that put you through a bad situation. You talk to me like a person who's his own unique individual. And I never want to talk to somebody like you, and I treat you like the people who started the Holocaust. You know what I mean? Like it's a stupid standard that you wouldn't hold yourself to, and it's just there to create division. It might make me feel good. It might be good for like the Ben Shapiros of the world to get a bunch of likes on Facebook, but like it's not ultimately changing the world. It's not making the world a better place. And what will make the world a better place, it might feel less good, but like it's funny because dunking on somebody is like the perfect analogy, because we've realized in the NBA the 3-point teams are the ones that win championships. The teams that can master the outside shot are the ones that win championships. We're all begging for Lob City, right? We want to see Blake Griffin go ham on somebody. But ultimately, that team is better when it masters the outside 3-point shooting, these very tactical, well-measured, well-thought-out things. I mean, to make the analogy fit, it's much better to relate to somebody on their terms, on their, like, what you see atheism as. I think one of the best things you can do when you have a conversation is to say, well, what do you mean by that? When you talk about, when you say capitalism, when you say socialism, when you say Christianity, when you say atheism, what do you mean by that? And I'm not trying to be disparaging. Like, it's just like, genuinely tell me what you mean so that I can use these words, because we all have different inflections for these words. Like I said, we all have different definitions.
It's all subjective,
right?
Too.
It's all subjective to our own experiences. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I say, what do you mean by this? There's this great poem. I know I'm quoting a lot here. I'm really not that much of a reader. It just happened to come up this way, guys. Where the guy says, if by alcoholism, and I'm going to paraphrase it because it's a long poem, but if by alcoholism you mean the thing that breaks apart families, the thing that gives people liver disease, that, you know, if by alcohol you mean all these terrible things, then I'm against it. If by alcohol you mean a celebratory thing that's really fun, that's enjoyed in moderation, that helps people loosen up, then I'm all for it. And that's my hard stance on the subject. I remember it was on an AP test, right, that I took back in high school. And I just remember being like, man, it's so cool that the guy's nuanced stance is his hard stance. And that's the best place to make your hard stance. Because I think a lot of people like to make a hard stance on something that's not nuanced at all. All Republicans are bad and all Democrats are good. Or all atheists are bad and all Christians are good. You take some and you say like, this is my hard stance, and the more you dig in, the less you look at QAnon and how they have no grip on reality anymore. And it's because they dug in so deep they were unable to move.
Well, yeah, look at all the conspiracy theories that they came out with around the same time, and it was just this kind of cult based around Trumpism in a way, and everybody was looking at it like, oh, this is the way we should go, and then some people actually followed through with suit.
Yeah. This is how neurology works. I mean, oh my goodness, I love that you're a psychologist because you understand a lot of this. That neurology, so the way your synapses work is the more you use them, the more likely your brain is to think about different paths. So one of the things that like, I am not a marijuana user myself, but one of the things that marijuana can help you with is actually open up synaptic relays. So you'll actually have thoughts that you didn't have of before. Now, some of those thoughts are there's good reasons your brain doesn't say 1 + 1 = 3, right? Like that is never true. If you can get kind of some of those weirdos who light up a doober and kind of start being like, oh, 1 + 1 is 3, and like the color purple is really green with it that identifies differently, and you're just like, oh my goodness, you are way out there right now, bro. But like, and other times, like the Beatles is a great example. You get taught about music, right? When we study music, you get taught a certain way. And the only way music evolves is if you try something that hasn't been done before. Well, the only way you're going to try something that hasn't been done before is if you tell your brain it's okay to go down that path. The best example I can give physically, like, I think people see like erosion on the side of like a hill, right? And so as soon as like water starts coming down one area, more water is going to come down that particular area. Right? It's just the way it works in erosion. That's the way your brain works. As soon as you start taking one path, this is why it's so difficult as you get older to change your mind about things, because you say, I've always taken this path. How many times did we hear when you go back and you play like Martin Luther King Jr. Tapes with people he would talk to, as he would say like, well, I've never lived with him. I really wasn't raised with him, and I'm not going to start. I'm not racist. I haven't been raised with black people, and I can't make that change anymore. And what it is that's just your brain saying like, I've just gone down this path so many times of expecting all whites when I get to a restaurant that I now expect that, right? I can't change anymore. But when you entrench yourself like that, you don't allow yourself. Here's the thing. I'm going to go ahead and defend the 1 + 1 = 3 for just a second. You should at least consider it, and then consider why you disagree. Right? To at least say, okay, like, I disagree. Like, okay, so everybody knows the Beatles made a really, really bad CD in India, right? That's where their music came to die, right? But the thing is, right, but what made the Beatles was them trying things like that. It just fit a pattern. They were like, we're going to try different things. Ultimately, what they did with rock and roll was really no different than what they did with their album in India. It just, that music sucked, but the other music was good. They were trying different things, and that different thing people liked, and that different thing really didn't work out. So when we say like, hey, let me go into your 1 + 1 = 3 for a second. And then when you fully explore it, you're like, okay, I don't believe it. It sucks. Right? But then at least you have the informed stance of knowing why 1 + 1 does not equal 3. Right? To say like, okay, I know why this doesn't work for me now. But at least I've been allowed, like you said when you were younger, and this is so important for parents that are teaching their kids, to allow them to explore. Go ahead and explore right now. We have a son who is an atheist right now, and we've allowed him to whatever. We never once have insisted on faith of any kind. He knows what our stance is on it. He's chosen to pursue his own. He's 13. We're thinking he'll come around on it later. Maybe he won't. Maybe I don't know. But ultimately his faith is his, and it's more important to me that he has ownership of his faith. And I don't have ownership of his faith, because ultimately even if God is real, his soul is going to not be judged on what I believed for him, but what he believed for himself. And so it's so important for him to be in possession of that. And so like when we talk about exploring different things and kind of expanding our minds to be more nuanced, to kind of get over what the idiot brain, what your natural inclinations are, we get into these things that we kind of find are truer, these hard stands on nuanced subjects that they only become hard stands because they have evidence, not because you've refused to see but you have all the evidence, as opposed to I had 2 bits of evidence and I ran from there.
Right, exactly. And that's, it's interesting because a lot of people, and by the way, I do want to, say I have such a level of respect for the fact that you are letting him choose as well, what he wants to believe in. Because I feel like so many, from my experience at least, so many Christian parents want their son or their daughter or, their child in general to believe in what they believe and to be governed by this set of rules and everything. And I feel like it's really important to have your child, explore the different regions of their brain, explore what they are going to be, because regardless, I mean, teenagers are rebellious. They're going to do what they want anyway, to some extent. So the fact that you're telling him, hey, it's okay, you can do this, and you have my full permission to do it, that gives, like, I feel like a sigh of relief almost for the child.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, you look at what happens. Look at the suicide rates among kids that have parents that try to command their beliefs for them. I mean, it's their we're taught from a young age, and it's hard because when they're a baby, you're dependent on your parent for everything. And there's some time between that and the age of like what 18, 21, whatever you want to say, that they need to become fully autonomous. So it's all transitory. They're moving from a period where they depend on us for everything for us to be a successful parent, and we have to move from that to them depending on us for nothing to be a successful parent, right? And so it's hard, right? That there's that whole like that slow swing, but to say like, you know what, you're too young to you're right now, you can't be around matches, like I think like, or gun ownership, right? This is a good one. You're too young to even like be fiddling around with a gun. But at some age it'd be like, hey, listen, for me to tell you, like, for you to feel safe about guns and to understand how they work, there comes in a time when it's like, hey, here's how a gun works. Gun's a tool. It's just a bunch of metal that's been organized this way, and it's very dangerous. And here's how you either use it or don't use it. But I feel it's important to tell you how they work so that you can be safe with it. Because we live in a world that has guns, right? So like, I don't want to just be like, guns don't exist. No, they do exist, but here's the knowledge about that, right? So for me, him exploring his faith is so important to me because I feel like I'm, and I don't even want to sound cocky about my own faith, but I am like, for me, I feel better about him coming around after exploring atheism, because I think if I denied it entirely, he'll always be wondering if it's real. There's this thing called the Santa Claus complex. We lie, we tell our kids a really good story, right? They feel great about it, and then they grow up and they find out it's fake. And what happens is then they ask, well, what else did you tell me that felt good that was fake? Because we said, oh, it felt good, like Santa, it felt good to believe in Santa. But that good feeling ended up not being reality. What other good feelings? And of course, naturally, kids look at their religion and they say like, well, that felt good. Was that real? Or was that just, and then when they find out all sorts of like the underbellies of religion, the things that you were hiding from them, that it's like, oh, so that was probably all fake too. Yeah, I think I got that backwards. Santa thing was fake, rest of it was real. But yes. And so like, I think for me, I feel so much better about him exploring this now. And that, like, because that's how I did it too. You mentioned at least having the freedom to being able to explore for your own. And that's so important because then you feel like your faith is truly your own, as opposed to somebody else's. And that's something, as I mentioned, it's all internal. We can generalize as much as we want about religion, but every single one is going to be dependent on the person of the believer, right? Every single one is just independent. Our beliefs are all independent from each other. And so for me, I think that, because this is kind of the route that I went, is I had this extreme, kind of kickback on God not being real or whatever, and then I did whatever exploring that I did and came to my own conclusions. But I would always wonder if it was fake, if I never went through a period where I was allowed to explore the fakeness. If you constantly are hiding from the fact that, if you're constantly hiding like bad things the Catholic Church did, your kid's going to find out eventually. The internet's real, right? And so it's better to be like, hey, let's acknowledge it. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. And I'll see how you feel afterwards then. And let me tell you how I've rationalized it. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that that's the better way to go about it. I think a lot of, if I may, a lot of atheists sometimes are like, well, look how many, people your religion has killed. And I'm like, dude, you guys got rid of 100 million people in the last like 100 years. Like, shut up, you know. But like they talk about how like hurtful like our religion is without coming to grips with theirs. And the thing is I'm not saying that they have to all be Christians. I don't think atheism is any more or less damaging than any other tools that authoritative tier. You know, if a tyrant gets a hold of it, whatever it is, it's going to be bad. You know, it's just that's the way tyrants and dictators work. You know, it's going to be bad. And so, like, I don't think it's any better or worse than any of the others. I just think it's the way that it's viewed and used. Now, I think atheists would do better to say, like, hey, listen, I understand what social Darwinism said about euthanizing black people, killing, you know, the mentally handicapped. I understand the contributions towards the Holodomor and the contributions towards the Holocaust that social Darwinism had. But I reject those things, and I still am a Darwinist. You know what I mean? Like, and let me tell you why. I think that they would do themselves much better. And this is an outside looking in thing. The reason I feel okay saying this without being judgmental is just because that works better as a Christian for me, to acknowledge the evils of Christianity's history without being like, and you're just like these people, or these people were okay. It's being able to say, like, no. In fact, like, I think as an atheist, it'd be easy to be like, hey, the science actually contradicted what these people were doing, you know? And I followed the science, and ultimately they turned, I mean, if you want to use religion as kind of like a derogatory term, they turned Darwinism, which was like an examination of the world around us, into a religion. And that's what made them. Right, which is what made, and they had a cult, and they had beliefs, and they had propaganda, and that is not at all what I believe. Like, I hate all that stuff, and I think that, and I feel that like that's where most atheists would land. But I think it's important to explore that as opposed to just deny. You know, like what Christians do when they deny all these bad things, like to say like, oh, your bad experiences, Ariel, those never happened. Like those, oh, I don't believe you, or like, you know, oh, that's like what 0.1% of, you know, whatever. Like, it's like, no, people really exist in environments of bad Christians, and so you need to talk about bad Christians. Like, I will never convince my son that Christianity is okay if I pretend that bad Christians don't exist, you know, because he's going to find out that they do. And the sooner I acknowledge that, the sooner we can actually have an honest conversation.
Exactly, and you know, I love the fact that we can actually have these open and honest conversations, and I feel like so many people are going to find such a benefit from our conversation in particular, because I don't feel like, you know, there are too many conversations of where there are civil debates between atheists and Christians. It really doesn't happen too often. So I'm really glad that I was able to discuss all of this with you. And to go into the final topic of what we're going to be talking, it isn't much of a topic as much as it is more of my curiosity. I would love to know what you are working on right now for your next review.
So I am still polishing up my Hitman 3 review for Second Print Comics right now. And that is what I'm doing right now. I am actually still wondering in the next game I'm going to play. Boy, I hate to be the subject. Oh, I don't even want to say it. I love, if you're enjoying Valheim, I love that you love it. I'm not into Valheim. I probably I probably won't review it because I think it's meant for a different person than me, and so I would like it's real. If you are like into like Minecraft survival mode, Valheim is probably like your ish. Like that's probably like the most fun you'll have. It is not for me. Like it's not fun for me. But like and so like if I were to write a review on it, I would probably have to specify like, hey, I didn't enjoy this and let me tell you why. But here's the type of person you would be if you would enjoy it. So I guess after Hitman 3, I guess it might be Valheim. I still am mostly writing like top 10 pieces and usually only write like reviews if it's like a AAA game. Valheim is very much, and in fact, Valheim is early access right now. Like it's not even officially out. So yeah, and so like it'll probably be whenever the next AAA game comes out. So I think you can probably expect one about Bowser's Fury. I think is turning into kind of like that. It's kind of developing that AAA hype. So yeah, it's got a little bit of Breath of the Wild kind of mixed with Mario a little bit, and love it or hate it. That's kind of the vibe that I'm getting from it. But I'm still playing, so we'll see. How about
Interesting.
you?
Okay. Yeah. The next game that I'm going to be reviewing after I post my review on the Medium is going to be Little Nightmares 2. You guys, who the first part comes out. Actually, when I'm recording this, the first part comes out today. This episode of the podcast is going to be out on a Friday, so we're going to be already having a week of Little Nightmare 2 episodes that are going to be on the channel. I'm very excited about that one. It's definitely very unique as far as the imagery and the metaphors go throughout the game, so I'm eager for people to see that review,
Your
honestly.
last review, like I keep wondering like how I missed it. Like your last recommendation to me is like 98% of people like 97% of people like Little Nightmares. How did I miss out on Little Nightmares? What?
It's one of those things that goes under the radar kind of easily because unfortunately and fortunately for some people, Tarsier Studios, the creators of Little Nightmares, is still an independent studio, but they're under Bandai, which is a big company and everything like that. So they're the one who distributes the game. And I don't know why they're as under the radar as they are, but their content is very, like, I want to say morbidly beautiful because that's a term I love to use a lot of the time for games that just strike me very visually. So I would highly, for anybody who's listening to this right now, the first Little Nightmares game and the DLCs, absolutely wonderful. If you love heavy duty puzzle work, if you love something that's really kind of like gruesome but not in like an overly good, like overly like overly good way, in an overly like bad way, it's very artistic. It's very not like blood and gore or anything like that. It's very all subjective of what your mind creates from it. So it's very much of like what you see is what you create
I
within
hate to
yourself.
sound like a total man here, but size really doesn't matter. And I mean, proof in the pudding here. What Supergiant Games is like 20 people, and they made like Hades and Bastion and Pi. I mean, come on. Like, obviously, the people like studios of 20 people can make a game of the year. So if you're still judging games by being like, it's not a big enough studio, you need to find a different way, a different metric of measuring greatness in games. Because yeah, last year's game of the year, unofficially, I guess Hades was like 20 people. So
Well, if you guys are watching this on YouTube right now, down in the description below, I have a link for all my articles on wix.com/huggable hipster. I might have to re-put the link, but if you're watching this on Spotify, I will be trying to link some external stuff if I can. I don't think I can link anything on Spotify though. But yeah, it's Huggable Hipster, and
sure.
it'll be the casual nerd. But I kind of linked to this Huggable. It's weird. It's weird the way Wix does like some of their stuff and everything like that. So I'll have to double check everything. But on
Oh,
YouTube,
awesome.
everything is
Awesome.
down in the
Well,
description below. If you guys just check my YouTube channel, Huggable Hipster Gaming, you will find all the links there. Yeah, I really honestly appreciate your time here because we covered a melange of topics. We covered so much, and I was so like eager to discuss all of this with you. So I'm happy you took the time out to come over today.
yeah, it is time very well spent. I appreciate you letting me talk till I'm hoarse. I think one of the downsides of being a podcast host, such as yourself, is that you're constantly listening to somebody else, and like a lot of times it's like I wish they would use a pause button and go on a monologue more often because you're the
That
personality that makes people listen in. You know what I mean? Like,
that's the thing. Like I don't find it like I don't find that as like a boring part or anything like that. I absolutely love whenever people come on here and feel like, oh, I have like this space that I can talk and I can be free to say what I want to say without negative repercussion or anything like that. It's always kind of like that safe space I want to have. And it's one of the things of where I kind of pride my podcast on being a diverse range of topics that we can discuss openly without judgment or fear of harsh criticism. I mean, we'll get our criticism regardless, but I always tell those kind of people to shut up.
yeah, yeah, for real, for real. You are a fantastic listener as well as a fantastic speaker, and it's either one of those takes a lot of expertise, and you do them both well. And thank you for having me on. It's time very well invested, and I've loved our interactions. I mean, we only met a couple weeks ago, and they've been great.
Yeah. Yeah. And you guys, if you like Cody, I will be putting his links down in the description below if you guys are watching on YouTube. And be sure to go over there again for all the links regarding all of his social media, where you can find his articles and latest pieces. And yeah, thank you guys so much for joining. If you all like my face and what I do, please be sure to subscribe and hit the bell down below if you guys are returning YouTube people. If you're listening on Spotify, then be sure to hit that follow button so we can get that engagement up and keep making these podcasts. And stay casually nerdy. I will see you all in the next episode. I will see you guys later. Bye.